I'm glad you said something. I'm glad you said something though, because it was, yeah, I was like working till like fucking 10:30 last night, so I probably just got lazy and didn't even think about it.
Yeah. No, all good.
So, well, dude, let's just jump into it then. So, obviously, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this stuff is I want you to provide value to agents. I know you just spoke in front of some agents, and I think one of the things that I admire about you is how you are able to build trust with people so quickly. And you do it so well. And even like with either a lead you've never talked to, but you do it so quickly. So talk a little bit about how you're able to do that, maybe where that conversation goes and stems from.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one because it's one of those things that's if you've ever heard the saying like it's caught, not taught.
Yeah.
There's so many things in our industries that you can learn. And that's not to say that I have like these intangible talents, but there some of it is personality driven. It's just kind of like how I naturally speak to people. I have genuine interest in things that, we might have in common. So I am kind of naturally, and maybe it's sort of my church background. I used to work I was a high school pastor for 3 years. And so, I'm working and talking to high school students. I'm talking to adult leaders. I'm talking to parents, grandparents. And so like I'm talking to a variety of groups of people. And I think it trained me to be able to like be flexible in the
Yeah.
types of conversations I'm able to have and the ways that I'm able to earn trust from different groups of people, ages, socioeconomic. So for me, whenever I'm talking, I'm genuinely curious. So I'm typically trying to establish something that we have in common,
Right.
whether it's sports or I know that person too, or you know them, or where did you grow up? I mean, Des Moines is such a small town to where like we probably have something in common with many people that we'd see anywhere.
Yeah. Do you have a specific like script or like questions that you like to ask when talking to somebody for the first time? And just, I mean, beyond who do you know where you're from, but anything else that has helped you build trust with people, especially when they don't know who you are, maybe they don't know who you are?
Honestly, no. I mean, some of it's very impromptu, honestly. And that's where like it might not it's one of those things. It's just like it's just how I talk. So it depends, whether it's I like to provide like comic relief when it's necessary because sometimes like it's a high stress situation. And sometimes you have to feel it out. Like you're trying to maybe like throw a joke in there and someone's like not having it. It's like, all right, I guess we're gonna be pretty serious, which is fine.
Yeah.
Um, but I typically, like how long have you been in Des Moines or like where do you live now? Or like, and if you ask 3 or 4 questions, like you're gonna be able to get something out of that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's about the vehicle they drive. Like I drive a Toyota RAV4 and I always joke around when I meet with clients. It's not a new one either, but when I meet with clients who are like driving a cool truck, sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. I'm always like, if you want to, I'd be interested in having a conversation about a trade, like straight up your Silverado for my RAV4. And it's kind of funny because I've had that conversation with people have not known I was joking, but so I don't really I say that because I try not to bake or like have pre-planned questions because from my experience it can feel disingenuous and not natural, and that's just not who I am. But some personalities, I get it. They have to be like, I need some of that structure. So I have a few, but for me, I don't have like a question in my head of like, okay, now I'm waiting to ask this because that goes against how I want to have conversations because then I'm not listening when we're talking. I'm just trying to like ask things, and as you're speaking, I'm trying to think of another question to ask, and then I'm not really present, and that's not really how I like to speak. So
Yeah. No, and I think that's a good way because it's good to have for me, like I like to have like an outline to know like, okay, here's some of the main points I want to hit on because it's easier for me to come back to you and be like, here's what our conversation was about.
yeah.
But also I do think it's good that like you do have to provide that relief and level with people because it's a high stress situation. Buying a house can suck. And especially if you're selling and then buying, like that can be really difficult. And if you can be the person that really, and this is why like you just make it so easy for people. You make it seem like this very hard thing to do. It's just like, hey, trust us. We'll take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't claim to do it perfectly, obviously, but um it's very much a people like business, and you have to know your stuff, of course. But it is really fun for me to be able to like make those connections, and I genuinely mean it too. That's another thing. Like you can't manufacture like genuineness.
Yeah.
you're either genuine or you're not. And that's what's tough, especially for those that are like so systematic. Like you cannot systematize kindness.
Right.
You can try to, and maybe it'll work, but like at least for me, that feels really betraying my like character, I guess, or betraying how I want my business to be. So it's not like it was funny. Like when I used to work at a church, I try a lot of my stories that were like more humorous. I tried not to really plan because I try not to plan humor because then it feels again like it's like staged or something.
Right.
And again, I'm not, and maybe I'm not making a ton of sense, but I try to make it as organic as I can. There's like, hey, here's some stuff we have to talk about. We're going to
Yeah.
talk about X, Y, Z. How we're going to get there is through where our conversation takes us, I guess. So
Almost like a stand-up comedian, Dan.
I have a stand-up notes app of a couple jokes. I won't share them right now because I don't know where this goes and who's going to see it, but I do.
So I guess that kind of is like, I, so obviously, you have the things that you want to talk about, but also, you want to provide the relief. So how do you implement your expectations into that and like bring that in? Because you do want to protect yourself, and obviously you are a fun-loving guy and are genuine, but how do you mix in being stern with expectations for obviously one of the biggest investments of people's lives?
Yeah. I think what I've learned, and I've learned it the hard way too, is setting expectations is so important for those two reasons that you just mentioned. First, it prepares your client for what to expect, but secondly, it does protect you, especially if you do it clearly and you've been doing it a while, where you kind of can anticipate where things can sometimes go wrong in a deal, and you're almost, I mean, you're preparing them, but you're also doing it so that when they come back and say, "What about this?" you can say, hey, I mean, and you do it nicely, of course, be like, hey, remember we talked about this, like, and that sort of thing. So, I do, when I sit down with clients for like the first time, I do my buyer consultation, for example, a little differently. Sometimes I have the PowerPoint up and we go through it, and sometimes they don't want that. And it's kind of a tough line. So I do try to ask people like, hey, are you the kind of person who's like, give me all the information? And they're like, yes, I am. I'm like, okay, well then we're for sure going PowerPoint, and we'll do it in a way that's conversational and stuff. And if someone's like, no, I'm not, like, but it's kind of tough because again, like if somebody's like, no, I don't want all the information, but it's like, I know you don't want the information, but I know you're going to need the information. So then you kind of have to adapt and try to creatively share them the process of things and the expectations in a way that's maybe not so
Yeah.
like slideshowy. And that's a tough one, I guess. But you know what I mean? Like some people are
Yeah.
like, as you think you're winning them over through this slideshow, you're like, yes, yes, yes. They're like, when are we done? Like, this is not fun. I just want to buy the house.
Right.
And that's where like sometimes you have to set the expectations that you have to set. And then there are some times where it's like, okay, I mean, they're not super conversational about the nitty gritty. They want to talk about something else. And so you have to balance those things.
Yeah. Have you have you had issues with, like you say, you learned the hard way? How do you with dealing with difficult clients, setting expectations obviously is ultra important, but how do you hold them to the expectation that you set?
Um, and this is what's really tough, because I tend to go on the extremes. I have like, this is the perfect case scenario, and this is the worst case scenario. And it's tough because like the worst case scenario can sometimes unnecessarily like worry or scare people.
Hmm.
For example, I'm in a deal right now where we have this property under contract and we don't have a place picked out yet. We're in the limbo period, and they might not have to have an in-between living situation.
Yeah.
But the reason why we still accepted the offer knowing that is because like it's such a good offer. So I basically, like, anytime you can have somebody else affirm verbally the thing that you need to hear out loud. So like for them, I said, so I need you to understand that, like, and I need to hear you say that we understand the risks, we understand what could happen, we understand we might have to get a short-term house or a storage unit. Whenever you can have them tell you out loud that they understand
Hmm.
the extremes and they're still okay with it, that's when you've sort of, I shouldn't say won, but that's when you know that you're good moving forward because, I mean, they said yes,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, you're transparent with people to the point where, you know, they're gonna it's easier to level with people when you're transparent about the whole thing, and you make them feel good about it. Because even like, yeah, if you're to say, hey, worst case scenario, best case scenario, usually it's gonna lie somewhere in the middle, generally.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and then, talk about a little bit about, when a loan is in, or a deal is in process for you. How does that communication work for you? Because I find one of the that's where, once there's confusion, and that's usually where it pops up, is like during the process, as there's confusion, it's because of lack of communication, and that creates frustration. So how feel like you always have raving fans at the end of a deal. So how do you create that raving fan during the process?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I try to, at the bare minimum, like on Mondays, I usually touch base with the client that's under contract.
Hmm.
Even if we don't have anything going on, and sometimes like there's not much to report. It's like, hey, here's where we're still here, but it's still just a good opportunity, because if you have to, what I think, at least people in our industry in real estate and in mortgage financing too, like for a lot of people, this is still their first time. So to us, it's like 2 weeks has passed, but it's like, yeah, but there's nothing to update them on. But it's like, yeah, but think about what they're thinking. They're like, okay, like, so going out of your way to say, hey, nothing really to update, but we're still rolling, we're still chipping along. Do you have any questions for me? That goes a long way. And it's one of
Yeah.
those small things that like can seem like it's not a big deal. But again, like your clients used you and they chose you for a specific reason in the beginning. And but what I like to say is, but they will refer you based on how you treat them in the transaction. So it's I see it sometimes and I get it. Like when we're busy and we're running around, like we can't forget the clients that we have though that are under
Right.
contract, because they still deserve the care that we promised them from the beginning.
Right.
And we have to make sure that we're consistent. It's not like we have to make sure it's not like we got them in the door and then they're just like, whoa, like they were so welcoming and helpful and they communicated in the beginning, and now I'm under contract and now I don't hear from them, and I guess I'll get a text that closing's in a week. And that, like, people can tell that that feels transactional,
Right.
and that's not, I guess, how I want to be. So a weekly touch in, even if it's, how are you doing this week? Like, man, weather's good. I mean, I don't know. It's figure something out. Like, figure something to say.
Right.
That's not
It's
rocket science.
you have it. I mean, every Monday, that's pretty easy. You block out your 2 hours on your calendar. It's systematized. Or, I send an email out to people. Like, you can automate some of that stuff too,
Right.
right? You can put out either videos, or if you have a CRM, you can put out videos, and every week, you click the next stage of your whatever, and the automatic text or video or whatever goes out, and it just handles that for you. But obviously you want that personal touch as well, and that's
Right.
that's one thing that you do so well, is you just stay in front of a lot of people, and people appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So how I think one thing that we had talked about is, like, you want to make fair comparisons of yourself, and not maybe to other people, but healthy comparisons. So talk about a little bit about, what that looks like for you.
Yeah, it's really tough in our industry because it's really easy to get disappointed and to get discouraged. It's really easy to look at others who are where you want to be. And what I've learned is like there's so much more to the story. Whether it's a matter of there's a realtor who's just killing it, but you don't see that they're spending $10,000 a month on leads.
Right.
And that's a real thing. It's like, okay, so they gross X, but they have $120,000 that they spend in leads. There's more to there's more to the story there, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just goes to show you that we make conclusive thoughts on things where we have partial information.
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous when you make something conclusive that you only know partially, because there's a good chance you're misunderstanding something. It's also fair to say that, like, okay, that person's killing it. Yeah, but their work-life balance is terrible. Like, stuff at home is not fun. Like,
Right.
they're going to work, and I'm making a lot of assumptions, but just from my like exposure to people and things like that, I've just learned that there's always more to the story. With that being said, it's not wrong to compare yourself in the sense of wanting to, like, bro, like, we naturally have to compare ourselves so that we can know what's the standard here. And what's tough is that, like, how we describe that standard depends a lot on what you want and your
Yeah.
values and there are some agents, and there's nothing wrong with this necessarily if it's what they want. It's like, I want to make as much money as I possibly can. So obviously their values, their time, their money, their relationships are going to reflect that.
Right.
There are others who are like, I mean, I want a respectable business, but I want some balance there. And so there's nothing wrong, But what's tough is when we start to compare ourselves with people who have different values than us and different goals than us, and then we get upset when we don't reach them. It's like, no, 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 you're not trying to reach what they're trying to reach.
Right.
So I think in the beginning, when you're trying to compare, like when you're tempted to compare, you have to like really know in the beginning, like what you want. So then you can know if your comparison is legitimate. You know what I mean? I could go on that.
No,
It's a can
dude.
of worms, you know?
Dude, I think it's interesting because you hear that a lot in our industry is like, oh, this person did X amount of million. Like, there's no way they could do that much. Like, and it's like, well, we don't know. You don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. So I guess if you were, if somebody came to you, whether they're an experienced agent or a new agent, like, what would you tell them? It's like, how would you tell them to like stay in their lane or like, really just get tunnel vision and just like in work? Like, what would your conversation with them be?
Yeah. I would say that there are, hmm, I would say I understand it. I mean, for starters, I think like sometimes like people aren't human enough in our industry, and
Yeah.
they feel like it's like they're being um I don't know, like it's a deficiency in them if they ever acknowledge the fact that they get worried or like, like, hey, I compare myself sometimes too, which for me, the realtors that I naturally gravitate towards that are older than me and who've been doing it longer than me and better than me, the ones I naturally gravitate to are the ones who are like really open about the fact that they still like get nervous. I met with Jenny Farrell, who's with our office, and she's like, every deal, I feel like, the world's going to fall and I'm never going to get a deal again. And she kills it every year.
Right.
But it's encouraging to a young guy like me because it's like, okay, now I know that like you could look at it two different ways. One, if it's like crap, so I'm going to be thinking this for a long time. It's like maybe, but if anything, it helps you realize that like other people are going through it too. So it's tough for someone who is killing it and is tempted to compare. Um, Again, like what I already said, numbers. There's a lot of things that go into those numbers, and there's not anything wrong with that. But you have a realtor who's representing a big builder, and they get 100 listings a year. Like, yeah, they're going to get massive amounts of volume. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And if you're kind of on, you're new and it's taking you a while, I know that it can get discouraging. For me, I kind of came out hot. And I'd also say, like, you shouldn't apologize for wherever you're at. I don't, if you're not doing so hot, you shouldn't apologize for, and I don't even like the way I said that, because there are things that are happening that we don't know are happening in our business. And just because we're not getting sales, it's sometimes, you know, um, sometimes it can feel like we're not doing the things right. Because ironically, I actually look to agents who are maybe, I don't know, like maybe doing a little less volume than me, but they're doing things in their business that I'm like, oh my gosh, I suck at that. They are doing such a more efficient way of doing business. And if they stay in it just long enough, they're going to be way past me. They're going to be way light years ahead of so many others. So I would say like all that to say, sorry, Jared, but having a mentor of somebody that's like, I respect you. I want a business similar to yours, and meet with that person regularly. And you really have to be able to trust them, and you really have to be able to take their feedback. And so
Mhm.
for me, there's a handful of realtors that I just have really high respect for, that like, if I ever turn out to be a tool, I've told them like, hey, like just hit me in the head. Like, I don't want to end up like like an ego-driven realtor. I don't want that. So finding somebody who is where you want to be, and shutting your mouth when you're together with them and just asking them questions and buying their drinks, even though they should probably be the one buying it because they're the one who afford it. But I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, and even to piggyback that off, so find a mentor, find somebody that you admire that'd be willing to, give you some advice, not even necessarily add you to their team, but just, keep you focused, give you some ideas. And I think even from our side too, even just you and I in relationship, I feel like we do a pretty good job of communicating pretty openly what we want our businesses to be and how we can contribute to each other's businesses.
Yep. Yeah, entirely.
So yeah, well, what do you have for me, Dan? You have any questions or anything
Yeah.
else that you want to talk about?
Yeah. I'm just curious, Jared, like, so for people who don't know, like we've worked pretty closely since pretty much both of us have started. And um, I guess I want people to know that like I've worked with a variety of different lenders, and you have by far been the one who communicates the best, gets to the client in an efficient, like timely way, because as a realtor, I pay for some leads. Um, it's important for me for the lender to recognize that. And
Right.
I've seen you hustle on deals that haven't panned out. And you probably knew they weren't even going to pan out right in the beginning, but you still like, it showed to me that you wanted to prove to me that you're going to hustle anyway. So I guess what is that in you that like you never seem to care about the purchase price? You never seem to care about, I mean, obviously you'd prefer, I'm sure, the lead that's maybe a little more clean. But like what, I guess, tell me how you've arrived at that perspective in your business where you're like, I'll help anybody, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Two things for me. One is, I mean, I was an athlete growing up, so like the hustle, like that's kind of what I've been accustomed to. It's like if you're gonna work at something, you might as well just go for it. The second thing is like even with my own home buying experience, like it wasn't anything to rave about. And so I just put myself in that shoes. It's like, okay, would it be fair to somebody who is buying $100,000 house or a $500,000 house to not get a home buying experience that's like, holy cow, that's easy. Like we just had a closing on Tuesday, and they hadn't bought a house since the 1990, and they were like, holy cow, we couldn't even believe that this was easy. They were shocked. Um, and so that's the type of experience that we want. Obviously, not every deal goes like that. But it best as we can, we want to provide an experience that people are like, okay, yeah, you know what, I'd rather keep this really easy and maybe pay a little extra to do it. Because like I said, as soon as there's confusion, there's frustration.
Mm-hmm. And that's entirely true. And that's been our experience with the deals that we've done. And the cool part about our relationship is we've done so many deals that we kind of have a knowledge and an idea of like how things kind of go, our systems and things like that.
Yeah,
And I guess a second question for you would be, I feel like on your end of things, like the financing things, can be a bit confusing for a lot of people, like
yeah,
the numbers, the interest rates, the like, how do you like explain things that like, I know we work with it every day, but
yeah,
for people who aren't familiar with like the language, the verbiage and stuff, how do you explain like things that are sort of complex in a way that people need to understand so they can make, because we don't make decisions for people,
right.
but we still have to like sometimes coach them to how to understand it. How do you like walk through that process with somebody who maybe has a harder time understanding the financing side of
Yeah.
things?
I'm very transparent to people and say, hey, I do this every day. So if there's anything that you don't understand or you need me to go over again, just tell me, because there's going to be phrases that I use that I just assume that, everyone knows because I use it every day. So I'm always like, just stop me, make me start over and dumb it down, because I'm more than happy to do that. Because like I said, if it were me in those shoes, I totally get it. I'd probably ask the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the next thing is I have tools in place where I have a tool, it's called Mortgage Coach, that allows me to create like a total cost analysis. So one of the big things is like, whether people are comparing programs or what doesn't make sense, when does it make sense to lock, or, how do these numbers actually translate to like a break even point, let's just say. So things that like, it makes you think more than just, hey, what's my interest rate? Like that's, yes, it's important, but it's not the only thing that matters when it comes to what's going to save you money in the long run. So what I usually do is I'll make a total cost analysis and either jump on a phone call with them and explain it line by line, like, hey, here's a couple of different things to look for, or I'll make a video going over it, and then they can go watch it over and over and over again. Because that's another big thing too, is I create videos over documents that should, like, you and we could set up a phone call to go over it, but when I make videos going over important information, you can watch it over and over again. And if somebody reaches out to me and has a question, I'll just ask them, hey, did you watch the video? No. Watch the video first, it should answer this.
Mm-hmm.
Or on the flip side, did you watch video? Yeah, and I'm still a little confused on that. Perfect. Let's jump on a quick call. Let's talk through it. So it's more so making it easier for me by giving them like more of my time, making videos and content, and
Mm-hmm.
just really keep it simple.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of long-winded.
No, but oh yeah, you're talking to the king of that. No, I've experienced that. So, and those things have worked really well for us.
Yeah, and it's important too. Like, if people want to know what their payment is, but also it's like knowing where the market is at and understanding how factors outside of your credit, loan to value, debt to income, how those factors play into how that's going to affect your loan. That's important too. Um, sometimes I tell people like, hey, if you don't care about this, then just it's not that big of a deal, but just know that I have your best interest in place on, where things are going. Obviously, no one has a crystal ball, so I'm not going to sit here and act like I know. I just have an understanding of the factors at play, with like the banking crisis and the Fed raising rates and how that's had an impact. So it's good to get that information out to people too, because as much as you don't think that would have an impact on your loan, it could. So, and it's worth having a conversation.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah. So talk about or Dan, for you, do you have like a system for, after closing? I think one of the best things that we can do is ask for reviews or ask for, referrals. Do you have a way that you do that that seems very low pressure, but also has a pretty decent conversion rate?
Yeah, admittedly, I don't think I've had it long enough to see the long-term effects and growth of it, but I use Follow Up Boss, and it's been great for me. There are certain parts of my business that I would love if I was more structured in X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
But I do think something that's really important in our business is, there's so many times where people spend years trying to implement something in their business and their system that they're just never going to be good at. And so
Right.
automating things that you're just not natural at, and it's not giving up. And I get it. Like sometimes we have to do things we don't love to do. But for me, Follow Up Boss has done a great job of automating. And as your business grows, like you just can't remember, oh yeah, I got to reach out to them. So Follow Up Boss has like a past client campaign. They ask for reviews. And there's just like a few different, there's a time where they ask for referrals. I'm starting to get some of those drip campaigns. So it really is just, it's ultimately just me getting in touch with them. And the way that Follow Up Boss works is it will naturally like, have your whole database in your, like, I need to talk to like folder is what I call it basically. Like, I think it's at least once or twice a year. I can structure that. So I have it set to where I have like a task, and at least once a year, I'm gonna, on top of the drip campaigns, which are not very extensive, it's like once every 2 months, I'm gonna personally reach out and make a more personal connection.
Yeah. That's awesome, dude. I mean, that makes a difference, and long term, I think that's repeatable and scalable as well. I would think.
Yeah,
So,
I've been happy with it.
well, cool, man. We got 8 minutes left on this thing, so I won't take up more of your time, but I do appreciate you doing this. I know it was kind of spur of the moment and last second, but I think for the amount of success that you've had, you have a story to share, and other people should be able to take away some of the stuff that you do. I know sometimes you don't feel like deserving of it, but you've earned everything that you've gotten for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, man. I appreciate the kind words. This is it's fun to do. Obviously, we talk like every day, so this is just
This isn't really much different than our day
yeah,
to
no,
day,
it's not at all. Yeah, not at all.
well, cool, man. Well, I don't have anything else for you. I'm gonna stop the recording.